Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We're starting to learn the identities of some of the large but still unknown number of Americans, in the low hundreds, they've assured us, who were abandoned by the U.S. military this week and remain trapped in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. The Sacramento Bee has just reported that at least 24 students enrolled in the San Juan Unified School District in the state of California are stranded somewhere in Afghanistan tonight. No one's certain where they are or how they're going to get home. The White House hasn't bothered to comment despite being asked. What's so interesting, the contrast that informs us really, is that over the past week, this same administration has overseen the evacuation of tens of thousands of unvetted Afghan nationals, many of whom will now be moved into neighborhoods around the United States and stay permanently. They didn't seem to encounter any problems in doing this. Thanks to meticulous and thoughtful planning, Operation Change America Forever came off precisely according to plan. It worked flawlessly. But a couple of dozen American school kids trapped in Afghanistan? The White House isn't really interested in what happens to them. So they passed that portfolio to Tony Blinken, which tells you how completely unimportant they consider it. Quote, if there's an American citizen left in Afghanistan, Joe Biden told us the other day, we're going to stay until we get them all out. Right. He didn't mean that. So what's Tony Blinken's plan to get them all out, to rescue the American citizens trapped tonight in Afghanistan? Well, as Blinken told us yesterday, the governments of Haiti and the Republic of Congo have sent a strongly worded letter to the Taliban, and beware, they mean it. You wouldn't want to see the Republic of Congo when it's mad. That's the kind of week it's been. Whenever you think we have reached peak insanity, they double down. This afternoon, the supposed president of the United States appeared out of nowhere and decided to speak in public. Did you see it? How to describe the experience exactly? Weird is just the beginning. So first off, for example, Biden announced that the United States is done with Afghanistan forever. We're gone and we're not coming back, ever. Then Biden angrily announced that we'd, quote, hunt down something called ISIS-K, which sounds suspiciously like a new line of cosmetics from Kim Kardashian, but apparently isn't. This ISIS-K, Biden said, may be hiding in Afghanistan, in which case we will hunt them down there in Afghanistan. So actually, we're not really leaving Afghanistan. We could be back very soon. The whole speech was like that. It was disorienting. At one point, Biden bragged about what a remarkably, really a stunningly and historically successful military and intelligence operation we have just witnessed, all of us together. Apparently, Biden is under the impression that the entire United States has lost electrical power and no one has a working internet connection. So this is what he said.
We completed one of the biggest airlifts in history, with more than 120,000 people evacuated to safety. That number is more than double what most experts thought were possible. No nation has ever done anything like it in all of history. Only the United States had the capacity and the will and ability to do it, and we did it today. The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals.
So no nation in history has ever done anything like this. Yeah, possible. But he didn't mean it like that. He's telling us that this was the Berlin airlift, plus D-Day, plus the moonshot, plus the invention of yoga pants. This was a triumph of American brilliance and ingenuity and will. 50 years from now, your grandchildren will celebrate Fall of Kabul Day with tears of pride in their eyes. My ancestors did that, they'll think. As we said, it was demented. It was literally demented. But over at the White House, they seem to believe every word of it. They are losing consciousness from huffing their own fumes. Watch Biden continue.
The bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave.
One of the guys on the scene who helped rescue Biden was an actual Afghan interpreter called Mohammed. Now, that very man is trapped in Afghanistan. He was abandoned there. We brought, of course, all the wrong people home. He just sent this message to Joe Biden, quote, hello, Mr. President, save me and my family. Don't forget me here. Sean Parnell is a former U.S. Army Airborne Ranger and a candidate for the United States Senate in the state of Pennsylvania. He joins us tonight. Sean, thanks so much for coming on. You hear all this chin-tugging about our allies left behind. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of people we've imported are not allies. There's no evidence they are. This guy was an actual ally, and he's still stranded there. You're getting the impression we are picking the wrong people, maybe on purpose? Why?
Yeah, well, Tucker, I'm just going to tell you, just listening to your monologue, I don't think that Joe Biden cares. And that's the tragedy of this whole thing. Here's a guy that's been a bureaucrat in Washington for 50 years. The only thing that he's been able to improve in that time is his own bank account. And you want to know how I know he does not care? Is because no one has been held accountable from the very beginning of this tragedy, right? You've had like right on this show, Tucker, I said right here a couple months ago that generals focused on critical race theory would cost lives on the battlefield, and that maybe, just maybe, they should focus on a withdrawal from Afghanistan. Our intelligence community didn't know the president of Afghanistan was fleeing the country, but they could read your text messages. We abandoned Bagram. We ceded Kabul to the Taliban. We allowed the Taliban to protect American citizens. All of that's insane. Now, tragically, Americans are dead. Hundreds, if not thousands of Americans are trapped behind enemy lines. Thousands of our allies are as well. And Tucker, there is something wrong from a leadership standpoint with the senior leaders in this country. There's a massive disconnect between the door kickers on the ground, the people that are serving front towards enemy, and the people that are serving in air-conditioned offices in the Pentagon. And quite frankly, I think that they've forgotten just the core tenet of leadership. Leadership lesson number one. It is not about you. Leadership is about serving others. If service is beneath you, then true leadership will always be beyond you. And career politicians like Joe Biden, that's how they are. That's how they're wired. That's all they really care about. And I think that you're seeing that lack of attention and that lack of care playing out in Afghanistan right now, right before our eyes every single day.
It's a lack of attention and a lack of care. I think you hit it right directly on the head, and I appreciate that. Sean Parnell, thank you very much for summing that up.
Thanks,
and you
Tucker.
did call it, by the way. You're right. I remember that. So American citizens are not the only ones who were left behind. And if you love dogs, this will upset you. You've probably already seen it on the internet. A whole bunch of dogs from the Kabul Small Animal Rescue were stranded in Afghanistan after the U.S. military left. Pictures of these dogs are everywhere on the internet. The SPCA has just confirmed that the Biden administration could have evacuated these dogs, but didn't care to. Quote, in the end, the dogs and their caretakers were explicitly not allowed to board military aircraft, and numerous private charter aircraft were not granted access to the airport either. Now, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and so maybe you're thinking, why care about dogs? But if you think about the expense, the effort, the danger that American soldiers have been put into to rescue Afghan citizens, some of whom are not our allies, it does make you wonder, why not the dogs? I've got 4 dogs in my bed at night and no Pashtuns. Some Americans care about dogs. Dafton Akhminovich is the senior vice president at PETA, cares about dogs. Dafton joins us tonight. So thanks so much for coming on. There are these pictures that, and there's one, of course, on the screen that are just infuriating, I think, to most normal people in this country who love dogs. Why weren't these dogs allowed on the plane? Was there some good reason for that?
That's an excellent question, Tucker. The reality is we heard from not just Americans, but from former and current employees of Department of State and rescue dogs, who of course remain a major concern, but also service dogs, working dogs, bomb-sniffing dogs belonging both to the American forces and Afghani forces. And believe it or not, companion animals belonging to American families who had evacuated and who we are told have since been released onto the streets of Kabul to fend for themselves. These are companion animals who have no survival skills and don't stand a chance unless there is intervention. And that's what we are calling on President Biden to do now.
You know, not every, you hate almost to say this, but not every culture appreciates pets and dogs the way the United States does. And dogs, as you just pointed out, do not stand a chance on the streets of a capital like Kabul, particularly right now in a moment of chaos. They don't take up much room. Again, is there some reason? I mean, it's so transparently cruel and mean Like, why would you do that? Why would you keep dogs off an airplane?
That's a good question, Tucker, and we don't know the answer to that. We have asked the U.S. government why this happened. We have asked them to rectify it, and we encourage Americans who care about this issue to visit PETA.org and join us in calling on President Biden to interfere now. This is not just about working service dogs. It is about companion animals and animals who were formerly street dogs who were rescued and now have been turned back onto the streets of Afghanistan to fend for themselves and are now again homeless for no reason whatsoever. These are thinking, feeling animals who are terrified. Yeah. And if the U.S. government won't help them, then who will?
Yeah, it's such a great point. And you always hear people. Obama was always like, "That's not who we are." Well, you know who we're not. We're not the kind of people who keep dogs off the plane. We're just not. No one wants to live in that country. I don't. Daphne, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So something amazing just happened in Washington because there's so much going on, most people didn't hear about it. The so-called January 6th Commission is trying to force big wireless carriers like AT&T to hand over the text messages and other personal communications data from the cloud of sitting members of Congress and members of the Trump family. That has never happened in American history. Nancy Pelosi doesn't like your politics, so she gets to read your text messages. Marjorie Taylor Greene is about to have her text messages handed over to Nancy Pelosi. She responds next. Right now on TuckerCarlson.com, by the way, you can still order a signed copy of the long slide. We'll be right back. Democrats on the so-called January 6th Commission are now demanding that the big wireless carriers like AT&T turn over the personal communications of members of Congress as well as the Trump family. We'll quote CNN on this. Quote, in its request to Verizon, for example, the Select Committee asked that the cell site location information, call data records, and content, cloud or storage content, and subscriber information be preserved. Oh. So in other words, when you disobey Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democratic leadership, they seize your text messages. Does that sound like a free country to you? No. And we can't allow it to happen if we want to live in a free country. Some senior Republicans appear to realize this. Kevin McCarthy is the top Republican in the House. He's the House Minority Leader. He just provided this show with this statement, quote, Adam Schiff, Benny Thompson, and Nancy Pelosi's attempts to strong-arm private companies to turn over individuals' private data would put every American with a phone or computer in the crosshairs of a surveillance state run by Democrat politicians. True. If these companies comply, he continues, with the Democrat order to turn over private information, they are in violation of federal law and subject to losing their ability to operate in the United States. If they pursue this path, a Republican majority will not forget and will be ready to hold them fully accountable under the law, end quote. That sounds like a threat, and we fervently hope it is. Marjorie Taylor Greene represents Georgia in the U.S. Congress. She's one of the members whose private communications are being demanded by Nancy Pelosi, and she joins us tonight. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. So you just got there.
Tucker.
Did you know that if you voted in a way that Nancy Pelosi didn't like, she would strong-arm a company into turning over your private text messages? Was that part of the deal as you understood it?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I think it's outrageous. After what America has been through, especially this past week, and what the Joe Biden administration has done, leaving Americans behind in Afghanistan, service dogs, fully arming the Taliban. Now they want to drag Americans and American taxpayers through another witch hunt, just like we saw with Russian collusion conspiracy lies and what they did to President Trump, spending over $30 million on what turned out to be nothing more than absolute Democrat political warfare. This is what they're trying to do to all of us. But this is leading us into waters that we've never been in America.
Right.
You see, America was never meant to be a communist country, but these are the tactics that Democrats are wanting to use.
Well, yeah. I mean, demanding your text messages if they don't like your politics. Now, we've been tough on Kevin McCarthy for being weak. That statement is not weak. That statement is a flat-out promise, threat, whatever you want to call it. If you do this, there are consequences. I don't see any other way out of it other than to make that clear. Do you?
Well, we have to make it that clear because you see, if members of Congress can have our personal cell phone data, exposed, and so that our Democrat colleagues and unfortunately some of our so-called Republican colleagues can rifle through just to hurt us politically in the next election, then we are going into a dangerous place in this country. It's no longer Republicans versus Democrats. It's more like Americans versus communists. And you see, it's not just us that will be in extreme danger. It's the American people, because we never want to have a federal government where they are willing to break federal law, violate our privacy, search and seizure, and demand from private companies to hand over this data. And these cell phone companies, these telecommunications companies, they better not play with these Democrats, because Republicans are coming back into the majority in 2022, and we will take this very serious.
Or you should shut them down. I mean, you should take those companies down. Would it be okay if Nancy Pelosi forced a private security company to raid your house at gunpoint at 3 in the morning because she doesn't like your politics? Like, where's this going? This is the single craziest thing I've heard in memory out of Washington.
Well, it's outrageous, and it should let everyone know these Democrats are not the Democrats that maybe your mommy and daddy voted for. These Democrats have fully changed, and they do not care about your privacy. They will do anything to achieve their political means, and that means violating federal law. And we will. These telecommunications companies, if they go along with this, they will be shut down, and that's a promise.
Good. I hope they're afraid of you. They should be. They should be. They're very short-sighted. They think Democrats are going to rule forever, but they should be afraid to wade into partisan politics like this. You know, they're public utilities.
Absolutely.
Back off. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So we spent a lot of time beating up on the government of China, and all of it we think has been well-deserved. But if there are signs that the Chinese government is paying closer attention to its citizens and its children, well, you got to be honest about that, and we're going to be. We'll tell you what they're doing in China that we could learn from. Never said that before, but in this case, it's true. That's next. You got to wonder how many hours we spent on the show attacking the Communist Party of China. A lot. It's a totalitarian government. Our leaders admire it, and that ought to make you very nervous. That's been our position. It still is our position, probably always will be. On the other hand, we want to be as honest as possible about things we see. So when the Chinese government does something virtuous, doesn't happen much, but we're willing to say so. Here's what they've done. China's announced it will limit private equity firms from raising money to buy residential properties in China. Why is that? Because Chinese citizens, turns out, need somewhere to live. Real estate bubbles are bad for everybody except, of course, for a small number of real estate speculators. As the Chinese government put it, houses are for living in, not for speculation. And that's a very good point. They may have learned it from watching, say, the state of California. In California, the average home is now over $800,000, in part thanks to speculation, and homelessness is totally out of control. Chinese don't want to copy that model. Nor do they want a California-style popular culture, one that worships celebrity over achievement. Obsessing over sleazy famous people on social media, Chinese officials announced that is, quote, poisoning the minds of the country's youth. Can they stop the youth from worshiping celebrities? Probably not, but at least they're worried about it, and that's a start. They're also, by the way, worried about video games in China. Online gaming for children in China will now be limited to 3 hours a week on the weekends. This is being done, the government says, quote, to prevent the addiction to online games. Is that a crazy idea? Well, according to a recent study in this country, the average American kid plays video games for more than 15 hours a week. A poll from the University of Michigan found that 86% of parents believe their children spent too much time playing video games. Apparently, the other 14% weren't paying attention. So it's a legitimate problem. What's interesting is, when was the last time you heard one of our political leaders even mention video games or housing market speculation or celebrity worship as a problem? Now, before you respond by saying that politicians shouldn't be involved in our personal lives, remember that the CDC already very much is involved in our personal lives. So maybe our government could take just a moment from bossing us around to improve our actual lives once in a while. Just go ahead and try. Even if you fail, it will be an improvement. At least we'll know you noticed. The families of several victims of 9/11 have just sent a message to the president to mark the end of the war in Afghanistan. We'll tell you what it is straight ahead. Just thinking, you know, Kabul fell in a day. The president of Afghanistan, the college professor, got on a plane with the cash and left. And most of us are really surprised by this, because for 20 years, the foreign policy establishment and its many lickspittles in Congress have assured us that everything was fine. We're building democracy. We're doing a great job. That's what our trillions were buying. We get a little time in the next week. We're going to put together a montage of Lindsey Graham talking about how great Afghanistan is for the last 20 years and ask him, like, did you believe it when you said this? He's always welcome on the show to explain. Maybe he'll come. Well, nearly 2,000 survivors of 9/11 20 years ago, as well as first responders and the family members of many of the victims, have just sent a message to Joe Biden. They don't want Biden to attend memorial events commemorating 9/11 unless he declassifies American intelligence documents detailing what the government knew about 9/11 before 9/11. That's still classified for some reason. Brett Eagleson is one of those 9/11 family members. He joins us tonight. Brett lost his father on 9/11. Brett, thanks so much for coming on. It's hard to believe that as we approach the 20-year anniversary, the U.S. government, through all these different administrations, has continued to hide intel about what it knew before 9/11. Why are they hiding this? Do you have any good theories?
Tucker, I don't know the answer to that, and I wish somebody would provide it to us. But the justification for a government secrecy itself is classified. So the government has invoked what's known as the state secrets principle on all documents related to Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11, and the justification for that principle itself is classified. So it's painstakingly hard for us as family members to be 20 years on and still be begging our government for closure. We have begged everyone. We have met with senators from both sides of the aisle. We have begged from administration to administration, and the U.S. government abandoned Americans in Afghanistan just like they're abandoning the 9/11 families. And it's a really hard thing to come to terms with, Tucker, is that your government doesn't have your back. We've been fighting. I've been on your show a handful of times, and thank you for covering this, by the way. I've been on CNN. It's just astonishing to me, Tucker, why our government fails to release this information. And the message to President Biden remains that unless you honor your campaign promise to us, don't bother coming to 9/11, because we refuse to go through another ceremony where a political leader stands up and says that how much 9/11 means to them and how much they grieve for us and how important it is, yet behind closed doors thwart us, thwart our efforts, and thwart closure.
I just got to say, I don't believe for a second this has anything to do with Saudi Arabia. Nobody cares about Saudi Arabia. This is protecting, I think, U.S. officials, Americans. Like, how did they screw up? I mean, if history is any guide, the people they're protecting are usually themselves, right? I mean, the Saudis, come on. Well, do you think that's really what this is about?
Tucker, I mean, there's a lot of theories, right? And the biggest theory out there is embarrassment. Embarrassment by our own intelligence failures. Embarrassment because of the fact since day 2, we probably knew that the Saudis were very much involved, but yet we started a war in Iraq. And, you know, one point I just wanted to make, and your former colleague, Catherine Herridge, just broke this story, which was lost in the whole shuffle of Afghanistan over the weekend. Catherine Herridge broke a story about a pilot. Pilot Brown was his name, who was approached by the FBI in 2012 about a document that the FBI found in a Saudi government employee's apartment. Do you know what that document was, Tucker? It was a diagram of how to fly a plane into a building. How much more of a smoking gun can you get than that? But somehow this document gets lost in the news of Afghanistan, and somehow our government feels like they're justified in keeping this information from me and from thousands of other family members. What reason is it that our government continues to keep this information under lock and key?